Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. Merry Christmas, if that's your thing. In the spirit of the season, I want to make today's Christmas podcast about generosity, talking a little bit about giving and the sort of, ways that being generous can make you a better writer and actually, one, I think, help your actual career as a writer, and even more importantly than that, help your practice as a writer, your actual writing craft to a certain degree. But of course, fundamentally, the reason to be generous is to be generous. Immanuel Kant the philosopher distinguishes between things that are ends in themselves and means to an end. And I think generosity is unique, maybe not unique, but it is something that is both an end in itself. It's something you should, do for its own sake, and its highest value, in a manner of speaking, is itself. Being generous is primarily something you should do for the sake of being generous. But additionally, being generous actually is a good strategy to get certain things that you might want into your life. So just before I get on this topic, I just want to mention again, the show notes are always at jonathanball.com or writingthewrongway.com. Writingthewrongway.com will take you to where all the podcasts and the archives and show notes for every episode are available. This specific episode is jonathanball.com/19. So 19, the numerals 19. jonathanball.com/19. That's going to get you the show notes where you get an article that kind of breaks down the three core reasons that I'm going to talk about today that I think generosity are a good practice for you, to make you a better writer. But again, fundamental to all this, and basically what even the strategy of generosity breaks down to, is fundamentally you can't be doing it as a strategy. There are good reasons to be doing it. There are good reasons to be generous with your work in your creative process and putting things out into the world in a generous manner. But ultimately, I think what has to happen is you have to be doing these things for their own sake. There's sort of secondary effects that maybe are positive effects for you, but they won't really come unless you're doing things for their own sake. So it's a bit of a paradox in a sense, where you really have to be focusing on generosity as an end in itself. But if you are doing that, you'll find secondarily that generosity can also be a means to certain ends. As we kind of segue into that, I just want to note a few of the things that I'm doing here. This is, again, the Christmas episode. It just happens to be airing on Christmas because that's a Tuesday. It's not Christmas right now as I'm recording it, but it's going to come out on Christmas. So again, I thought, the generosity being something I think about a lot would make a good topic for today. Next week, what we're going to do is talk with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who co-created the 95 Books Reading Challenge with me. So I'm giving you a bit of heads up on that. We're going to talk a little bit about the 95 Books Reading Challenge, and we're going to talk a bit about some of the best books we read in the year and in 2018. In 2019, I'm also going to do the 95 Books Reading Challenge. If you go to 95books.com, you can find information about that challenge, and get just a bit of basic rundown around what 95 Books is. But again, next week, Ryan and I will talk about it for you. I'm changing a lot of the things that I do going into the new year. I've been thinking through what I've been doing in the last few months and figuring out how to streamline it. I have found that I'm I've kind of end up in a space where I'm doing too many projects. And as I was talking about last podcast on episode 18, jonathanball.com/18, if you didn't already hear it, the episode on productivity, the first core thing is to focus and have your priority figured out. Of course, you have multiple things you're doing all the time. For me, historically, there's been so many different projects I've started and developed, and I kind of hit a space where I was doing all these different things, and I was spread across the web in various ways. I own like 20 websites. So I started kind of stripping them down last year and consolidating them all at jonathanball.com, more or less. They're not quite all there, but they're mostly consolidated there. And then recently I just relaunched. I did kind of a soft relaunch because I'll talk about it more fully in the new year. But I just sort of soft relaunch of jonathanball.com. If you happen to have stumbled across it lately, you'll notice it looks different. And there's less content just immediately available on it. One of the things that's going to happen in 2019 is there'll be more things there than there really ever has been before. But in a sort of temporary segue, there's going to be kind of less things obviously available. I'm sort of trying to strip everything down really to its core basics and then kind of refine everything I'm doing a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of build things up again. In 2019, like I say, I'm really going to focus on stripping things down to their core essence and then developing up a bit more fully and going a little bit more in depth. So this podcast is something that I'm going to keep. I'm keep doing this podcast. I'm going to try to find some ways to kind of dive even deeper on this podcast with some guests and also some solo episodes. If you have particular suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Again, I'm in this period of trying to figure out what I'm doing precisely. I know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to figure out precisely how to refine those things. So things like this podcast, if you have particular suggestions about it, for topics or just general things you think would be great to have on the podcast, just email me. I'm always at jonathan@jonathanball.com. So JONATHAN is how you spell Jonathan. That's the correct spelling of Jonathan, JONATHAN, at jonathanball.com. All that sort of said, again, in 2019, there's some really exciting projects that are going to kind of come to the fore. I'm going to put out another poetry book. I've got a short story book that I'm going to be finalizing, which will come out the following year. And I'll give you a lot of the behind the scenes into those two projects. I'm going to show you a lot of things behind the scenes. So if you're not already on my newsletter, which is jonathanball.com/newsletter, go there and sign up. You can find it really anywhere on the website. It'll ask you to sign up like in 80 different places. The reason I want you all in that newsletter, if you're not already on it, is that every week I'm sharing the best thing I write that week. I'm going to send you the actual best page I wrote that week, as opposed to years down the line when things finally get published. No, you'll get access to it right then. And then maybe more importantly, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I wrote, like how I managed to construct that page. What are the tools that I used? What are some of the tricks and tips to try to get that going? If I'm doing editing, you'll see, for example, like some of my editing techniques and some insights to really specific examples. The really core shift I'm making in the 2019 in terms of the writing instruction is I'm getting further and further and further into really specific, deep examples. What I find is that there's a lot of information online about writing, how to do this, how to do that, but much of it is very surface level or very superficial in the sense that it's kind of giving you a quick skim over the topic. I'm going to, as this podcast develops and as my website develops a bit more fully, just keep going deeper and deeper. My sort of goal down the line is to be writing about topics that are kind of interest to fewer people, but is really going deep into those things. So if you have really specific things that you want me to talk about, if you've ever had some really specific questions about writing, anything that's really confused you, or you just maybe you got some information about it, but you want just more information. Like you can't find the thing that you want to know in detail. That's the thing I want to know about. So drop me a line, Jonathan@jonathanball.com, or find me on social media or whatever, and just tell me what is the thing that you want to know. What is the thing that you can't find information on somewhere else, or the thing that you just are having the hardest time with. I really want to know what you're having the hardest time with, and particularly if there's some way that I could kind of go deep into that subject for you, maybe with the help of a guest, and really kind of get to the heart of that matter. So it'll be very exciting to do this stuff in 2019. I'm very grateful that you're listening, and that if you're one of my patrons on Patreon, thank you. And if you're not, thanks anyway. So I want to talk about generosity in three particular issues. One of the issues, there's sort of three ways in which generosity, I think, is a powerful practice for writers. It can sound very new agey, I think, to say things like this. It kind of makes my skin crawl sometimes to say, you got to be grateful, you got to be generous. It's just not like my personality. Like I'm a nihilist, pessimist. But at the same time, I have a very scientific and analytical approach to things. I don't believe in, any sort of vague, airy-fairy kind of nonsense. I think that everything, especially everything to do with writing, which is a craft, everything can be brought down to the level of practical, almost scientific application. So I don't believe in a lot of the abstract, spiritual ideas about, why you should be generous. I think there's, ethically, it makes sense on just a really cold philosophical level. I think it's important to be generous, but also on a very practical and specific level. I think there are three, for writers at least, there are three core benefits. The first is that generosity is the best marketing. The best way to actually market your work is to be generous. Now, creative writing is maybe not unique, but it's very particular in the way that it is a product. If you want to get into the cold business aspect of it, let's say you are a person who is creating art, is writing creatively, or maybe even writing nonfiction, but you're writing, let's say, assume writing creatively for the sake of the example, and you are confused about how to market your work. How do you get people to buy books? How do you get people to pay for your writing? How do you make a career out of this, or even just make a part-time, extra bit of boost to money for when the kids are sick or something? Well, it's not an easy question to answer, and I think it baffles a lot of writers. I'll get more into marketing issues and more particular detail in later podcasts. So again, if you have a really specific question, even if I don't know the answer, I can, Paul guest in and we can both learn. Let me know if you do have these really specific questions. In a broad sense, the thing to keep in mind about your creative work is that it doubles as its own marketing. The best marketing for your work is your work. So there are two core types of marketing that are useful to creatives. One is something called content marketing, which is that basic idea that I was talking about, that your work is its own marketing. The best thing to market your fiction, for example, is your fiction. And so if, for example, you want to sell novels, like that's your thing, you want to write novels and sell novels, the absolute best way to market your novels is to give away your novels, either whole novels or parts of your novels, etc. Now you see this happening all the time. You go to Amazon, you can download, an ebook sample. The idea being that, well, you read the sample, you like it enough, you'll buy the book. So that's the simplest form of content marketing. It doesn't always work super well, but of course it does work. If you've ever read an ebook sample and then bought the ebook, you'll know that does work. I kind of subscribe to an extreme form of content marketing, which is that I believe that you should give away a lot of work, and you should consider giving away all your work. Now, I don't give away all my work, but I give away quite a bit of work. I know other people who do give away all their work. Derek Beaulieu, as a simple example, is an author/artist. If you go to his website, which I'll link to in the show notes, derekbeaulieu.ca, I believe. Derek Beaulieu gives away basically everything. All his books are available as PDFs you can download. All his single pieces he basically publishes on that website. Basically everything Derek Beaulieu has ever produced you can get for free. Either you can buy it also sometimes, but often you can just get it directly for free from him or just somewhere else. If there's something that Derek doesn't have available for free, like say a publisher puts out a book of his and it isn't for free, the publisher doesn't want to give it away for free, he'll then pirate the book and put it somewhere, in some way, shape, or form. So, that's a really extreme example. You think to yourself, well, how does a guy like that make money? Well, the simplest answer to a question like that is there are basically two things you can sell and make money from as a writer. You can make money from products, which you're writing, for example, or you can make money from services. So doing some writing for another person, for example. Generally speaking, and there are of course exceptions to this, but generally speaking, it is easier to sell services than products. There's downside to selling services, which services are more time consuming to produce. You can only, if you have to do some writing, well, let's say it takes you 5 hours to write something. Well, you have to sit down and write something for 5 hours. So you can't use that 5 hours for something else. That's just how it boils down. If you're charging, $50 an hour, that's it. Every hour you make $50 max, and that's the end of it. You only have 24 hours in a day. Of course, you can't just be writing every hour, etc., etc. So services have sort of upsides and downsides. One, they tend to be more higher priced. Two, they tend to be much more difficult to sell. But you don't have to sell as many services because they're so much more high priced. Products, on the other hand, generally are harder to sell. It's usually, or they can be easier to sell. They can be harder to sell. It depends. But in general sense, they cost less for the most part. We'll get into product services in some other podcast, but generally speaking, let's say you got a book. Well, somebody can buy your book for, let's say, $20. If you bought my book right now, if you went into a bookstore and bought my book Clockfire, the publisher, I think you'd pay about $18. I would make $1.80. So if I sell you a copy of Clockfire, I make $1.80. Now, that's pure profit because I don't have to do anything. You just walk into the bookstore after listening to this podcast, you buy it. I didn't really do anything. There's no moment I sat down and sold you the book. It didn't take my time up, let's say. If everybody listening to this went out and did it, I'd make, 180 times whatever that amount of people would be. And I didn't have to do anything. So within 1 hour, let's say it takes me an hour to record this podcast, I might make anywhere from, $1.80 to, or, zero, but all the way up to, let's say this podcast sits there forever. And, over time I sell 1,000 copies of Clockfire and I make whatever the math on that is. I don't even know because I'm so bad with math. $1,800, let's say. Well, great. There's no real limit in terms of products, especially theoretically speaking. Your product sales could maybe be passively derived in this sort of way. So some ways products are a better thing to sell, but they don't make so much money, generally speaking. Other ways, services are better to sell, but they're very time consuming. There's all sorts of trade-offs. regardless, giving away products, giving away your work, I think is the best way to market your work. If people like your short story, they may like your book of short stories. But even more than that, let's say you just give away every short story that you write. You never sell a short story in your entire life. You can still probably make good money becoming known as a writer of good short stories. So if you go and read a short story and get paid to do that reading, well, maybe you haven't made any money from the short story, but you maybe made more money doing that reading. Again, if you just, one of the things that Derek Beaulieu managed to do with his profile that he kind of developed through giving all his work away, is eventually he landed in a really great job as a creative director at Banff. So the Banff literary retreats and all the sort of programming that they do. Banff, this beautiful place in Alberta, the Canadian Rockies. So there are all sorts of ways to derive an income as an artist that do and don't depend on selling work, selling your products. But even beyond that, so whether you're trying to sell books or whether you're just giving books away for free, I think fundamentally giving things away for free is a way to do that. Cory Doctorow, famously gives a lot of his, I think he still does this. He used to give every book of his away for free, even as it was coming out with major publishers. I'm not sure if he still does that precisely, but it is a sort of real strategy to give your work away for free. You just then have to figure out where's your money coming from. If it's not coming from selling work, it's got to come from somewhere else, right? But again, maybe you've got a speaking career and you're kind of giving your content away, again, doing content marketing to boost your speaking career or whatever. But even beyond that, even if you're not going to make $1, let's say, theoretically speaking, that you make no money off your work. You can't sell a product. You can't sell a service. You're just in this situation of giving your work away for free. I still think it makes sense, even as there's always some way that you can manage to survive if you develop an audience. If you're giving your work away and you develop that audience, that audience will be the thing that carries you through every single economic shift, every single change to Google or Facebook's algorithm, anything you rely on in terms of technology or in terms of a job, etc. If you have an audience that is willing, who that loves your work and knows who you are, there's always some way you can kind of survive. The audience will be generous to you if you're generous to them. I just believe that firmly. So I give a lot of work away. Sometimes there's a strategy behind giving things away. Like I'm giving this away and I'm thinking, well, maybe this thing down the line will get sold, or I'll make money on somebody hiring me to do editing or writing or whatever. But other times, I just am giving things away because I want to be in the habit of giving things away. It's more important to me to be giving you something for free than it is to be scheming some way I'm going to make money off it. This podcast is a simple example. It costs me money to make this podcast. I don't make a dime doing this podcast. It is just the thing I do. One, because I want to do it for you. Like I just want to do something for you. And this, I think, is a interesting thing to do. It's something that I want to learn more about. So it's an opportunity for me to talk to people, hang out with my friends and put a microphone there, and you have an excuse to hang out with them now, in an otherwise busy week, or, just a way to meet people, and, just get to talk to people and learn from them. But fundamentally, it's just something I'm doing to give to you. I don't really have any plan to make money off this podcast in some future world. I don't know, maybe in some manner it'll end up being worth it, I guess, in the money terms. But I somehow doubt it. I think this podcast is going to be a financial drain. Generally speaking, I don't see a business model for the podcast. And I'm not interested in advertising and so on, and so forth. But, I just think it's the kind of thing that I can do for you. I think it's more valuable than other things I could do for you in terms of valuable for you. And I think it's something that just fundamentally, bare minimum, it gets you and other people to know who I am. Maybe I'll make money off of knowing who I am or not. But generally speaking, I think it's a good approach to, just build an audience through giving things away. You can always, Cory Doctorow once said something along the lines of, it's hard to monetize obscurity. It's hard to monetize fame, but it's even harder to monetize obscurity. And while I don't think the goal is, to become famous, or the goal is to necessarily be thinking of ways to monetize an audience, I think the goal is just to build an audience. You want your work to connect to an audience, even if you're never going to make a dime doing that. That's what you want for your work, right? You're doing this creative work. There's easier ways to make money than writing. Let's just face it. If you have $100 in your pocket, you're worse off investing it in your creative project than you are investing it in a stock market. So fundamentally, I think at a certain level, even if you have the goal of making money, I think fundamentally at a certain level, that's not your real goal. Your real goal should be, and I think is, to do the work, to do the creative work, and have it connect to an audience. And I think that at that base level where your fundamental real goal beyond making money or beyond, making a name for yourself is just to connect the work with people. And so if that's your goal fundamentally, I think you need to be giving away work. And also you should be giving away your best work. Your absolute best work. Sometimes people get this content marketing idea in their head, but they get stingy about it. They think, well, I'll give some stuff away and then I'll keep my best stuff and try selling the best stuff. I think that's backwards. I think you should be selling good work, but your best work, you should be giving away. Again, that's what I do every week. Every week, I write however many pages I write. Let's say I write 10 pages in a week. Well, I find the best one of those pages and I just email it out to everybody for free. Everybody on my email list gets my best page every week for free. Think of it like a creative tithe. 10% of the work I make, roughly speaking, I just give away for free. And it's the best work. It's not the, junk or the, kind of less great stuff. It's the absolute best thing I think that I produced. I give it away to you for free. Why do I do that? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, but the core reason I think is that I want to give you my best work. It's about giving something to you now, not selling something to you later. I think that's an important distinction to make, an important attitude to have. If you have that attitude, I think, where you're trying to really give your best material to your audience and develop an audience through giving out your best material, I think that the audience will, in its return, take care of you and be generous back, when it's warranted or when they can, when, when you need it at certain moments. So the audience giving back to you isn't the goal or the point necessarily, but I do think it is a secondary thing that will happen if you have the right spirit of generosity and you're approaching things in that spirit. If you're not approaching things in that spirit of generosity and you are kind of strategizing that it's fundamentally for you about selling something later, I think that it's going to backfire on you. It's just like if you decide you're going to write, you don't like romance novels and you're going to write a romance novel to make money. Sometimes you hear people do things like that. It always backfires because the audience can smell it. They can smell that you just want the money. They can smell you're not passionate, and they can smell your cynicism. And I think that the same is true in terms of this, content or permission marketing. There's a way that I think permission marketing and content marketing are effective marketing methods, but I think they only are truly effective when you are coming at everything from that spirit of generosity and you have that desire to really make a connection. And that's your priority. And, other things like sustaining business are secondary considerations for me. I mean, I do a lot of things that where I can make money maybe doing something different or differently, but that's not how I want to do things. And so I think, you always want to stay close to just being generous and focusing on that. Maybe just be kind of smart about how you're doing it and think a little bit through, not just what is the thing you want to do, but what's going to best help your audience. Sometimes it's not the same thing. The other thing I think is important about generosity is I think generosity is the best networking. I find that's another term that writers use, like marketing, networking. There's these two terms that writers use, and I think often they use them wrong, and I think often they have the wrong intentions behind them. Again, marketing is not necessarily a bad thing in the sense of trying to, connect to your audience, reach your audience, find your audience, and then give something to your audience. I think that is the right way to approach marketing, as I just said. But of course, there's this wrong way to do marketing. Networking is similar. I think it's a word that writers use often, so I'm using it, but I don't like the word that much, in part because I think there's two misconceptions about networking that writers have. One is that I think writers don't network properly on a fundamental level, because I think the best way to network is just to be generous. You find people, and I think what a lot of writers do is they try to network in the sense of trying to find, like, who's the person who can help me? Who's the person who can help me? Let's find a way to connect to that person. Now, I'm not super famous or anything, but, I've been the person in a room that others want to network with. I've been in those rooms where, I'm not a big fish, but in that room, I was the big fish. And if you've ever been in a similar situation, maybe you've got a few books behind you and you've been in a similar situation, maybe you've been on a panel at a conference, or you've been, at a reading that you're launching your book, or you've been in some other scenario maybe where somebody's coming up to you and you can smell, like a shark can smell blood in the water. You can smell that they don't have a true interest in you. They just have a sort of self-interest that they think they can get to through you. So maybe they're being very nice to you, and like from an objective point of view, like a person observing the encounter might think, oh, that's a very nice person. It's really nice how they came up to John and did that or said that. But or subjectively is a very different thing that's happening. I think sometimes writers lose sight of that basic idea that they shouldn't connect to others from a place of, let's use this person somehow. Other writers come at it like, well, if I can help them if they help me. I also think that's the wrong way to go about it. Like, you shouldn't be speed dating with other writers to try to figure out, who are the people I can help that can also help me. There's a few problems with that approach to networking. So one, again, if you're just kind of coming at a person thinking, I want to connect this person because they can help me, they can smell it and they won't. The last thing they want to do is help you. Secondarily, though, if you're coming out from a place of reciprocity, if they help me, I'll help them. Again, that doesn't work, because even when you do manage to establish a good relationship of reciprocity, if that's the basis of the relationship, I'm helping this person because they're helping me, at a certain point, one person in the relationship will just ditch the other for a bigger person. Like that's not a long-term self-sustaining relationship. It could have like these short-term gains perhaps, but you're never going to make a long-term gain or relationship. I think those are the two ways a lot of writers approach networking. The best way to approach networking, I think, is to come at it from this spirit of generosity and think to yourself, not who do I want to connect with because they can help me, but to be thinking, who do I want to connect with because I can help them? If you come at it from that way, I'm going to build a network by just helping other people. I'm going to connect to this person because I can help that person. And you don't necessarily have a thing you want in return. Or if you do have something you'd like in return, you don't, that's not the reason for it. You're not making the ask. If they ever offer, you'll accept the offer, but you're not going to go at it and, ask. I think generally speaking, it's best as a policy to try to come, at meeting people from that place of generosity. There's a few reasons for that. One is that I do think long-term it's a more effective way to meet people, because then you're actually making a real relationship. Even if that person never, like, quote unquote, does anything for you, like even if that person never helps you in your career in any way, you will still like gain from that relationship in the sense of, again, it being an end in itself. You'll have a good relationship that then will make you a better individual. You'll learn from that person just by being around them. Their, success will just kind of rub off on you, not in the sense of they're opening doors for you, but in the sense of like inspiring you or giving you a bit of a direction in terms of being an inspiration in that way, or even just, they're doing something, you're like, oh, I'll try doing that thing they're doing. I find it really valuable. Some of my best friends who are artists have been a real like value to me in the sense of I just feel competitive with them, I want to hang out with them because they just get me fired up, and it inspires me, and seeing them succeed is really great. And even when it's something like I would like to do, I don't get jealous of them. I just am like excited for them. And, I kind of am like, I got to try to like do something like that. I think there's a very healthy way to do networking in that sense. So you want to build a network, in other words, like you want to like connect to these other people, because being in that network is going to make you better. Again, the network, I think, is of value in itself. Trying to like use your network to gain things is, I think, the wrong approach. I think like networking is good if it's that approach from that spirit of generosity where you're just trying to connect to people so that you can be connected to them, and so that you can share in their successes in the sense of being happy for them and supporting them. Again, I think you really want to focus on helping other people. Ultimately, what you want from a network is just to be in it and for it to be good, like to be a good dynamic. And you want to be part of a community that is a strong and healthy community. And even if you're not making a career gain by being part of that community, great. That's not the point. The point is not to make a career gain. The point is to be around other people who are making career gains, and helping them, in their careers. That's just the kind of community that you want to be part of. You don't want to be, don't want to be in a web of warring spiders, right? You don't want your network to just be a web of warring spiders. You want it to be, this beautiful garden where everything is blooming. And if your career has to take a back seat while you help somebody else, I think that's great. It's not a race. And the other thing that consider in terms of networking is I think writers have a misconception about how useful it is, and how you're at network. I think if you don't know people, you don't realize how little it helps to know people. It sounds weird to say that, but honestly, like if you're kind of listening to this and you're thinking, this guy's crazy. He, of course, knows all these writers. He's probably benefited from them in various ways. He just doesn't understand or doesn't remember what it was like to not know anybody. Well, look, I was just traveling down to Northern Ontario to visit my family. I had my daughter with me, my older 18-year-old daughter, Jessie. And she was talking about like, wow, what it must have been like this is like a small town of like 100 people. There's like nobody there. And the area is very isolated. It's like northwestern Ontario. The closest city is Winnipeg, which is, 4-hour drive away. And Jessie was saying to me, wow, what must it have been like to grow up around here? I wonder what it'd be like. She was kind of just looking out the window because, of course, she grew up in Winnipeg in a city. And she's like, I wonder what it was like to grow up around here. And I was like, well, it was crushingly isolating. I said, it had its good points. There was a lot of good, and I'm glad I grew up there in many ways, but it was just crushingly isolating. If I want to see a movie, let's just say you wanted to see a movie in the movie theater, the new actually this did happen. Let's say that the Blair Witch Project comes out, or the new Star Wars movie comes out. When I was in high school, they re-released the original Star Wars with like extra digital effects. So when I wanted to go to that, okay? So if I wanted to go to that, just go see a movie. Let's say I wanted to take a date and go see a movie. Well, I had to drive 30 minutes in the opposite direction, pick up my date, and then cross the border into the United States, and then drive an hour and a half to get to the movie theater. That's one way. So that's a 2-hour drive one way, crossing the border into the United States. Then I go to the movie theater. So the movie, let's say, takes 2 hours. Well, then you got to get home. So you can drive an hour and a half, cross the border, drop your date off, and drive half an hour home. That's a 6-hour process to watch a 2-hour movie. You're driving for 4 hours. Now let's say you want to go have some coffee or like get a pizza or even just, hang out, try to, make out under a bridge or something, whatever you want to do. You're just adding to that 6 hours. Like think of, let's say you leave your house at 6. Well, you get back at midnight. That's your, let's say your parents want you home by midnight. If you leave at 6, get back at midnight, you haven't left the car except to see a movie. It was just crushingly isolating. And there was no real internet. Like I had the internet, but it was the days of like, it took you 2 hours to download one song. It just wasn't the connected world it was now. We didn't have smartphones, I still remember when, I'm not that old, I'm like 39, but I still remember when I could dial 4 numbers. Like my friend was like if I want to call my grandma, I'd hit 5303 and that would dial my grandmother. I didn't have to dial not even the area code. I didn't even have to dial the 3 numbers in advance because that's just how small everything was. So anyway, the point is, I do remember what it was like to not have a network. If you think I'm just jaded or I've forgotten, it's not the truth. What people don't realize if they don't have a network is that their network doesn't really help them. It doesn't help well, I shouldn't say it doesn't help at all, but it really doesn't help. I like to tell a story about when I've published my book, my first few books. So Alana Wilcox, who is great and amazing editor, and also the person more or less running Coach House Books. I met Alana Wilcox. I forget how I met her, but I met her through some people, and I got to know her a little bit. And I ended up playing Words with Friends with her over Facebook. So we were like friendly enough that we would see each other, at different places whenever she happened to be in the same location. I'd end up seeing her for some reason. I'm playing games with her over Facebook, right? We're not super close, but we're friendly. Well, around that same time, I finished my book, Ex Machina, and I think, well, this would be a good book for Coach House. I'll send it to Alana. And she rejected it. So But at the same time, we're playing Words with Friends. So there's actually a moment in human history where, I make my move in Words with Friends and also make my move metaphorically by like mailing Alana this book for her publishing company. And then Alana makes her move in Words with Friends and then also makes her move rejecting my book. And then, it's my turn. So my move was just, I made another move with Friends and I sent my book to another publisher. It didn't bother me that she rejected it. I hoped that she would have accepted it. I wanted the book to come out with Coach House, but I didn't expect her to accept it just because we were friendly. Like, it doesn't happen that way. She's got a business to run. It's not like publishing is very relationship dependent and heavy in particular ways, but fundamentally, like, those relationships just get you accepted faster or rejected faster. So like, there's a speed that comes with the relationship, but it doesn't change things fundamentally. Not really. You still have to do the work. Atlanta ended up selecting my next book, Clockfire. She published that. She accepted my third book, Politics Knives, published that. I sent her 2 books recently. She rejected one. So that's like knowing me more, being friendlier with her, and having published 2 of my books, and still getting rejected by Alana. She ended up accepting another book also, but so I do have a book coming out with Coach House. Like I say, fall 2019, I'm putting out a book to Coach House, but fall 2020, another publisher, a great publisher, Book Hug, whatever you want to say, is publishing a book that, I'm thrilled to be publishing with them. Just like Ex Machina, Lana rejected that book. Well, Jay Millar ended up accepting it at Book Thug. Now, ultimately, that made the most sense. I didn't realize at the time, but like Book Thug they weren't really doing books at the time. But then I think my book was one of the first books with a spine that they ended up doing, like in terms of a trade book. But in any case, the point is that these relationships, they can help you, but they just help you kind of get things faster. You get things published faster or rejected faster. But the difference isn't the relationship. The difference is just in speed. I like to say that what your network really does is it gets your work rejected faster, which isn't, insignificant, but those doors don't open for you just because of your network. Or if they do open, sometimes it's bad. You got to be ready to walk through that door. Like, your work has to walk through the door. And if your work isn't ready to walk through the door, if it doesn't fit through that door, then whether the door's open or not doesn't matter. Either the door's open and your work doesn't fit, and whether the door's open or not, it doesn't make a difference. Or the door opens and you're not ready, and you walk through and you fall flat on your face, and it's worse than if you hadn't walked in. So I think writers overvalue their network in the sense of trying to open doors for you or trying to move your career along. But I also think they value it improperly, because again, the real value of your network, of these amazing people that you've managed to connect with, is just knowing them and in finding ways that you can help them, not figuring out how can they help you. So kind of along these 2 lines, I think the third and most significant reason to be generous in your work, with your writing, is because it makes you happier. There's a lot of science that goes along with this in terms of gratitude and in generosity. But the fundamental way that it boils down is maybe best described in a book by Dr. Carol Dweck. The book's called Mindset. And Mindset, it kind of is about a different thing, but it's basically, she's looking at psychology, taking a psychological perspective she divides two different mindsets, what she calls a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Now, a growth mindset is where you believe that qualities like intelligence or talent can be improved. Whereas a fixed mindset is you believe that things like your intelligence, your talent are fixed. They're impossible to truly improve. Or you can make small and maybe minor changes, but you can't make real fundamental changes. So again, where this matters is in some ways talking about talent. Writers sometimes believe that you're born with a certain amount of talent and you develop or don't develop that talent, but it's fixed. You've got a sort of limit to your talents. So that's a fixed mindset. And the other way of looking at things is a growth mindset. You think that, may or may not have some natural talent, example for writing, but whether you do or don't, you could either develop it or develop it, massively, just given how much work you put into it and how you work on it and so on and so forth. In other words, you have the potential for growth versus, you having this fixed limit. Now, obviously, there are certain limits to certain things. If you're physiologically built a certain way, you can't maybe, you're going to hit limits potentially, doing certain sports, let's say. But even in that sort of sports scenario where you could find, a person who's going to be limited in particular physical manner at a particular physical activity, usually there's still the outliers, the people that break through that. And there's ways around these limitations, generally speaking. Again, but the first way around a limitation is to not see the limitation, to not see it as a fixed quality that you have, but as something that you can kind of grow and develop beyond. Now, that sounds very new agey, but there is a sort of scientific basis there. Where I want to bring it to generosity is something related to this, is something that is an idea that you sometimes hear, a mindset of abundance versus scarcity. Without getting kind of too fully into, Dweck's research or these psychological concepts, I just want to note that it is fundamentally going to make you happier to assume, even if you're wrong, to assume that you can be generous, that you don't have just a fixed amount of things. You don't just have a fixed talent. You don't just have a fixed intelligence. You don't just have a fixed amount of good work you can do. But you always can do new work. So even if you're wrong, that attitude is going to make you happier. Being generous, giving things away, is going to make you happier. Here's a really simple example of it. So one, again, if you're marketing well and from a generous place, you're going to build connections to an audience that supports you. Even if they don't support you financially, they may support you and your work with their enthusiasm and, the kind of love of your work. If you're being generous in your quote unquote networking, again, you're going to develop a community. You're going to become part of a world of people that you're happy to be connected to. And you're going to be, again, even if you're not developing or advancing your career necessarily, and even if that's a frustration that you have, being around these people is going, if you've got the right attitude around it, if you've got I just want to help these people no matter what, even if they can't help me, or even if I'm not going to go anywhere in my own career. If you have that approach, you're going to end up, happier than if you focus on the ways that they're beating you, or focus on all the ways in which, you wish they would help you, but they don't. Again, that kind of more positive approach, ultimately, the results of certain things are out of your control. And you may have these really particular limits to your career, or your work just may not be saleable or marketable. It might be too weird. I think weird work is more saleable, but in any case, you'll just be happier coming to things that place of generosity, and you won't experience the frustration as much when you do have a career frustration. But the other thing just to really give a simple example, if you're thinking about your own talent and your own creative work, again, if you come at it from the approach of, I'm going to be generous with my work because I want to connect to people and I want it to matter to others the way it matters to me. And if you decide you're just going to be generous about it, you also inculcate this mindset that there's more. There's more where it came from. There's more where that came from. The really simple example I like to give is a computer crash that eliminates and wipes out your work. Like everyone else, I've experienced that problem. You have a computer crash or you lose some files or some issue technologically speaking and you lose work. So whenever that happens, it used to really upset me. Of course, it is upsetting. But what I learned over the years after I kind of had been doing this for a while and I had, adopted these more generous practices, what I realized is, I could just make more work. Like, yes, it hurts to lose that thing that I lost, but there's more where that came from. Maybe I can't do that again, but I can do something else. I'm not going to stop. Like, it's not fixed. I don't have a certain amount of creativity in me. And once it's gone, it's all gone. And so I have to be miserly about it. I have to, charge money for this or, keep this behind a paywall because, that's, who knows if I'll ever do anything that good again, or I've got this book, I got to find the perfect publisher and I got to get the most amount of money. No. That's not the way to think about it. If you believe fundamentally that you have a limit to your creativity and there's a limit to how good you can do something, or if you think that that was your only chance, that novel was your only chance to become a famous novelist, or that, short story is your only chance to, win some award or whatever it is. If you've got this idea that the work somehow is something you need to be stingy about, one, you're going to be miserable. And two, you're going to just not make as much good work. You just will. You'll get frustrated, you'll become miserable, and you won't develop the mindset you need to have, which is this kind of growth mindset, this abundant attitude where in your heart, that you could do more work. If it was a mistake to give that thing away, if you could have made a bunch of money, selling it in this particular way, well, it's okay because there's more where that came from. You can just make another thing. You can make another book if that one doesn't hit. Maybe it's frustrating, but you can make another one. You need to kind of have that attitude to be happy. I also think, practically speaking, it will help your career to have that kind of an abundant mindset and attitude. But more than anything, I think you want to just not be miserable while you're doing this work. So for all sorts of reasons, the best way to think is think generously. So thank you for listening. I hope you're having a happy holiday, whatever holidays you happen to celebrate. I'll talk to you next week and keep writing the wrong way.